We're continuing part two of the Calc Sulph series. We're talking about Scorpio. And it's been a while since I've had the chance to get into this because I've just been busy clinically. So I haven't finished or completed the series. So I wanted to make sure I do this, and we'll get into it because this is an interesting, very interesting salt. And the Scorpio phenomena, being the archetype of death, is a very interesting one from an astrological point of view when it comes to understanding the constellation of Scorpio, because Scorpio is by nature an extremely resilient sign. And I think in the other part one, I talked about the plutonic aspect of this salt, because generally Pluto does rule excuse me, the cells of the body, and it has that ability to really dig into the deep reservoirs of the body. But obviously we cannot ignore the Martian aspect in connection with this sign as well, because Mars is the traditional ruler of this sign, and it's a very important aspect to it because the Martian principle is extremely masculine. It's incredibly very strong-willed. As most Scorpio signs or Scorpio types, depending on how many planets you've got in Scorpio and depending what aspects are going on in these kind of configurations. But originally, Scorpio was when the winter, the time of the season when Scorpio came. Obviously, because all the signs and the mythologies around them start into the northern hemisphere of the planet, and obviously I'm down here in Australia, so that's reversed. But up north, we have the constellation is in fall, so it's like in the descent. It's the sun's starting to decline. So the sun is the main configurator, the giver, the light giver of the world. And when the sun hits the sign of the eighth sign of Scorpio, after the pivotal point of Libra, which is the balance, and now it's starting its descent in the underworld. And this is where we have a lot of the mythologies that come about from Scorpio being the dead, so to speak, and the passage and the gateway to the underworld, so to speak. And we can look at this fact in a way from even from Chinese astrology, because it's that time of the dog, the month of the dog starts coming in, and the dog is considered the gateway to the underworld as well from the Chinese astrological configuration. So people usually with two dogs in their chart, followed by either a pig, those two animal branches are the descent in the underworld as well. And it's interesting how I've got this picture of hell from Nordic mythology, the goddess of the underworld, because when you do your digging, most things all come from the goddess tradition. And it's interesting how they always have the dogs, or Hades has his dogs as well, and dogs being the gateway to the underworld. And the symbology is really important to consider when we look at these signs as well. But Scorpio is also known as the angel of death, and so there's a few ways we can look at this, because the Scorpio being the eighth sign, having its descent in the underworld, there's a lot of consideration to think about when we look at this, because we're Scorpio generally rules the sexuality and the sexual organs. It's like that eighth zone of the body, or that the eighth division of the body, and the division of procreation. And this kind of idea coming from this, and I think Inez Perry talks about this in her book quite significantly. Well, I mean, it's important to look at this because we're talking about the conservation, I think personally, of Jing and essence because Scorpio is a deeply sexual sign, and it is ruling the sexual organs. So I think it's very important to cultivate, and I think Inez Perry deeply goes into this in terms of her astrological work, expanding on George W. Carey's book about, the cultivation of Jing and essence, and the abuse of this will cause harm to the body. Wrong use of this energy does. So, and it's interesting that I think when we look at the glyph of Scorpio, it's very similar to the glyph of Virgo. And there's almost like this, balance. And there's Virgo, then there's Libra, and then there's Scorpio. And then when we look at the balance card, the justice card, it balances between Virgo and Scorpio astrologically. And there's this balance between the kind of virgin archetype and the whore as well. So I think what really the tarot and the astrology are trying to say by these constellations is there's a balance we need to keep in order to cultivate our sexual energies. And it's a fine line between having a disharmonious or imbalance there, which can be detrimental to our health. As the ancient Taoists would say, if we're not conserving the three treasures, what they call Jing, Qi, and Shen, then we'll have disease. And I think a lot of imbalance within this sexual energy and around Scorpio can cause great harm to the body. So excessive sexual activity can create stiff limbs, stiff back. It can weaken the vision, so to speak. It can make the body more tired and lethargic because overuse of this energy, our libido, not cultivating in the right directions. And it's interesting because Scorpio relates to the masculine, in my opinion, and there's obviously feminine traits to it, but more so on that level. But it's interesting the increase in awareness about, more so in the West now, it seems like to be a bit of a trend on the internet about men cultivating semen retentions becoming the flavor of the month. And I was talking about this with my friend and colleague Loudon Strang when I did an interview on cultivating men's health. We were touching on this, and this is a really concept in Chinese medicine that's been around for a long time, and the ancient Taoists knew this, to cultivate it and when to have an orgasm and when not to, and it's all determined by the body's constitution and how this kind of thing relates. We've got to take all those kind of things into account. But it's interesting that this whole semen retention thing in men now is becoming extremely, extremely popular. And I think this Scorpio, or the imbalance of calcium sulfate, Calc Sulph, can cause extreme imbalances in this, particularly in the prostate gland in men, and a lot to do with semen retention. And I think when we haven't cultivated this aspect of our lives, we can get severe problems, and especially with the prostate organ. So that's really, really important to understand, because Scorpio is also the sign of alchemy, and also when the sun is considered, Richard Allen, there's a brilliant book, Star Names, Their Law and Meaning, and Inez Perry always comments on this book, and I've got a copy of it, and it's very, very deep, and it's very precise in terms of, there's just some fantastic explanations about alchemy in this book I found, and one of them was, his quote would say that alchemists held Scorpio in high regard, for only when the sun is in this sign could they transform iron into gold. iron into gold could be performed. So Mars rules iron. And the Martian energy, Inez Perry would say, so when we look at the zodiac, it's tropical, it's seasonal, it begins in Aries. And then once it hits Libra, it's at that balancing point, like I was saying, and then it's about to fall and descend in the underworld. But Inez Perry would state that that first sign, those first 7 signs, when Mars is moving, when the energy is moving through those signs, so to speak, it creates and operates the 7 vital organs. That's from Aries to Libra. And she'd say this in a positive way. And then once Mars begins its fall in Scorpio, it affects those organs and those parts of the body negatively. And she'd say that these parts of the body are very easy to lose their spiritual vibrations. And I think when it comes to sex and sexuality, there's a fine line between that balance. And I think this is what the balance card in the Justice card is on a deeper level trying to tell us, particularly in the Hermetic Tarot deck. The symbology in that deck I find incredible on that level. But there's that fine balance between understanding how to cultivate this energy. Because this energy can be used creatively, it can be used for it's what I would call deeply rooted in Yang Qi as well, because and Yang Qi gives rise to our immune systems. From the Yang gives birth to the Wei Qi in Chinese medicine, and the Wei is our body's defenses. But a Yang is cultivated in the kidney, and the kidney has a lot to do with our will to live and a will to create. And when we have Libra followed by the balance card followed by the death card, well, and the Libra rules the kidneys, and it's interesting how it moves from the kidney into this Martian energy, because these two elements are kind of combined with the yin and the yang. And that symbol on that Justice card in the Hermetic Tarot deck clearly states that well. But I think when it comes to the essence of this salt, I find it fascinating because I'm a herbalist, and in Chinese medicine, when we talk about Scorpio, there is a herb which we use the scorpion, right? It's called tuanjie in Chinese, and this herb is absolutely phenomenal. And herb, it's probably the only animal product I use, if you can call a scorpion an animal, but it's like poison to treat poison, right? And this is what Calc Sulph is actually, the level of Calc Sulph when we're talking about the level of depth involved in using this salt when diseases progressed usually to that 3rd stage. So there's really a lot of fire toxin, a lot of wind, as the Chinese would say. And I'm not sure if I mentioned in part 1, but it's really critical for using this salt when it comes to burning soles of the feet. So that really extreme peripheral neuropathy, people who need to stick their feet out of the bed. I recently had a patient who came to see me after a number of issues she was having after having certain medications, right? And then her feet were literally on fire. And I gave her high doses of this salt, combined with some herb tonics, herbal medicine, a lot to do with wind and pain, because the scorpion we use in Chinese medicine is very good for pain management, migraine headaches, these kind of things. It extinguishes wind. Wind in Chinese medicine can cause paralysis. It can also cause convulsions. This is why we use this Scorpio herb for the scorpion as a herb as well. And then we also, it's for liver heat. Heat deeply rooted in the liver meridian, which it can in turn cause this suppuration, can cause this fire toxin within the prostate, which Calc Sulph is definitely indicated for. There can be, it's also the scorpion as well as Calc Sulph, I'd put it in both categories, are both used for toxic heat accumulations, painful swellings particularly on the liver meridian. So the liver meridian runs on the medial side of the leg, running up through the inner thighs, so to speak. Swelling nodules, masses. We use it in Chinese medicine, the scorpion, for the migraine headache, cerebral embolism, mastitis, epilepsy, and whooping cough as well. It's been known for very good for. But there's all these similarities. I always bring in the Chinese because I'm a herbalist, so I love looking at these things at these different angles because it gives us a different level of, my personal opinion, a different level of understanding of how to use the salt. And another really cool thing about this salt is used for venereal disease with Kali Myrrh. Because we've got to remember Kali Myrrh rules the lower mind. The lower mind meaning it rules Gemini. Gemini rules the third house, which is the lower mind. Whereas the opposite of that is Sagittarius in the ninth house, which rules the higher mind. And so when we're talking about venereal disease, lower mind things, which Inez Perry gets into, people who have maybe weird sexual perversions can't stop thinking about this kind of things. And these, from that psychic level and the psychological level, with these kind of perversions, these salts can balance out these things. It's also another very important point is used for barrenness in females, particularly to do with PCOS, which in Chinese medicine we will just call phlegm. Things tend to be a little bit more simpler in Chinese med. We just label things as phlegm or phlegm on the ovaries, this kind of thing. Like I said before, when diseases progress to that deeper level, when there's pus in the testes and prostate, which I have a few cancer patients at the moment, particularly with tumors on the kidneys, and have been having a lot of these kind of problems. I've been subscribing high levels of this salt. And another important thing to understand too when we're talking about the blood is just the last thing I do want to mention is when there is a lot of suppuration, for instance, like this gentleman had with his cancer, particularly on the kidneys, is that he did have a lot of, and this, because Inez Perry mentions this in the book quite a bit, or in one section of the Calc Sulph chapter, which I found interesting in correlation with this gentleman's case, is that the suppuration he had with the pus infections, particularly in the penis and the testes, caused, well, he had very, very low iron, which is, and Calc Sulph is indicated for the third stage, or one of the three reasons why people can become anemic is when they have a lot of suppuration. So, and of course he ended up, and it was fighting osteopenia at the moment. So, yeah, it's incredible how these kind of things can manifest with deficiencies and things like this in the body. So I'm going to move on. Next time, we're going to talk a little bit more into, where am I up to? This is Scorpio part 2. I've done Libra, so I'll probably move into the Sagittarius terrain on part 2 of, I think, Silica. And stay tuned for that one, guys. And thank you for listening.